I became famous for was Forbidden Archeology, which I had a co-author for that one. His name was Richard Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
And that book presents archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, archaeological evidence showing that human beings like us have been on this planet for tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years, and this evidence contradicts the current theories of human evolution that are taught by mainstream scientists. And then more recently, I've come out with another book called Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, in which I present a consciousness-based alternative to the current theories of human origins. I propose that we didn't evolve up from matter, but rather down from consciousness. That's what I mean by devolution. We didn't come up from matter, but down from pure consciousness or spirit. We're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And these books are pretty widely available on the internet, bookstores, things like that. But if people like, they can visit my personal website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, and they can learn more about the books there, get them if they like.
Okay, great. Now, me, myself, I believe man has been around a lot longer than we are told. So, Michael, why has modern science, how come they're not, don't believe man is as old as maybe you believe?
Well, I think there's several reasons for that. First of all, I should say that there's a lot of scientific evidence that's been reported by scientists that shows that human beings like us have always been present on Earth. That's a fact. That's there in the original scientific reports, but these reports don't make it into the textbooks that are used in the official education system, in the high schools and the universities. It's kept out because of what I call a process of knowledge filtration, that operates in the world of science, where the discoveries that go along with the currently dominant theory that human beings like us only came into existence about 100,000 or 200,000 years ago, and before that there were only primitive ape-like ancestors. Evidence that goes along with that evolutionary theory of human origins passes through the knowledge filter, and therefore it'll be there in the textbooks at high school and university. It'll be spoken about by scientists on television and stuff like that. If you go to the museum, you'll see these things because they go along with the current theories. But the more radical evidence, the evidence that contradicts the current theories is filtered out, which means it doesn't get included in the textbooks. You don't hear scientists talking about it on the National Geographic specials and things like that. If you go to the museum, you're not going to see these things on display. They may be there somewhere in the museum's collection, but you're not going to see them displayed to the public. So why does that happen? Why does this knowledge filtering happen? I think there are a few reasons for it. One is it's just human nature. For example, if I love somebody and somebody tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to believe it. I may even become angry at the person who tells me. That's just human nature. So today scientists are very much in love with their current theories. They're especially in love with the Darwinian theory of evolution, especially as it applies to human beings. And if they hear something that goes against the theory that they love, they don't want to accept it. They may even become angry at the person who says such things. That sort of thing does happen. But I think there's some deeper reasons for the knowledge filtering. It has to do with power. There are a lot of different kinds of power in the world. There's military power, there's political power, there's economic power. There's also intellectual power, which is a more subtle power, but it's a very real one. And we see that people who have power, particularly those who have monopoly power, normally they don't like to give it up. They like to keep their position of power. And today, the supporters of the current Darwinian theory of human evolution have a government-enforced monopoly in the education system in this country. By law, only their ideas can be taught. If anybody tries to teach anything different, they'll find themselves in big trouble for it. So, so somehow or other, they have this government-enforced monopoly in the education system, and that's a pretty good position to be in if you can think about it. If you have some idea and the government's saying only your idea can be taught, that puts you in a very good position with respect to any alternative ideas. It means you're able to exclude any alternative ideas from the official education system, which means you're able to maintain your own power and influence and control over a lot of people's minds, and that's very important. So those are some of the reasons why I think they resist. And I think one reason they resist is that the alternatives to the Darwinian theory of human evolution are going to tend to involve things that the people who are now in control of the education system don't want people to hear about in any kind of authoritative way. They don't want people to hear that, well, maybe there's a spiritual element to reality, there's a more conscious-oriented element to reality, that we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings, that there might be something to what they call paranormal science. There might be something to UFOs and aliens that show that we're not alone in the universe. These are things that are very disturbing to the people who now have a government-enforced monopoly in the education system, and they want to keep that stuff out. They want to keep it marginalized. Sure. They want to have it. It may be there in society, but they want to keep it at the margins. So those are some of the reasons why I think this knowledge filtering process goes on. A lot of it has to do with power, money, things like that.
Okay, so now if we didn't evolve from apes, and I never really believed that myself, then how did we become?
Well, I think before we even ask that question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, well, what exactly is a human being, or any other living thing for that matter? Now, today, most of the scientists who are working in the scientific institutions and teaching in the universities and writing the textbooks for the high school students believe that a human being or any other living thing is simply a combination of the ordinary material elements like iron and calcium and phosphorus. That's what they think we are. We're just a complex organization of these ordinary chemical elements. And, they think that if you organize these elements in a sufficiently complex way in the brain, then we get what we call mind and consciousness, but only in connection with the brain, with the body. And they believe as soon as you disorganize, these chemicals, there's no mind, no consciousness, no love, there's just nothing. Under this picture of reality, it is matter that is fundamental. It is only matter that really exists. And it's they believe that consciousness is just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. That's the mainstream scientific theory these days. So what I'm proposing is that there's something more to the human being than just the chemical elements. There's a really existing mind element with some very unusual paranormal powers like remote viewing, psychokinesis, that means mind over matter, the ability of the mind to make matter move in ways that violate our current laws of physics. And beyond this subtle mind element with its very unusual powers like telepathy and remote viewing and psychokinesis is a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the body, completely apart from the brain, completely apart from matter. So when I speak of mind and consciousness, I don't mean, as many scientists today mean, just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. I mean, real things with their own independent existence. So that means a human being is made of matter, mind, and consciousness. And I believe it's consciousness that is the most essential part of the human being, and that consciousness, that individual conscious self, originally exists on some higher level of reality, what I would call a level of pure consciousness. But if it comes down into this level of reality, it needs a vehicle in which to function. For example, as human beings, we're normally meant to live on the land. You know, we walk around on the land. If we want to live underwater, we need some vehicle that will allow us to function in the element of water. We need a submarine or a diving suit. So where do those submarines and diving suits come from? Well, they come from intelligent engineers who understand that if a human being is going to exist under the water, it's going to need a special vehicle. So these engineers, they design and build such things. So in the same way, as beings of pure consciousness, we're normally meant to exist on a level of pure consciousness. If we come down into the world of matter, which is where we find ourselves now, then as conscious beings, we need vehicles made of matter that will allow us to function on this level of reality. And those vehicles are what we call bodies, human bodies, plant bodies, animal bodies. And where do they come from? Well, they come from higher intelligences in the cosmos who understand that if conscious selves are going to function in the world of matter, they need vehicles made of matter in which to function there. So these higher intelligences, they design and build such vehicles that we call bodies, including the human body. It's very similar to an idea that's become very popular recently in these Avatar films. And in that Avatar film, they've got this guy, his consciousness is projected from his normal body into the body of an alien being on an alien planet, so that he functions on that alien planet by having his consciousness channeled through this alien body on that alien planet. So pretty much, according to what I think, we're all pretty much in that situation. We're all avatars in that sense, and that we're ultimately from some other place where we exist on a level of pure consciousness. And
so our bodies are a vehicle for our consciousness, as a boat would be for our bodies to, say, travel through water.
Yeah, like a submarine. Like if you want to live under the water, you can't just you can swim underwater for a few minutes or seconds, but if you really want to stay there, you need a vehicle like a diving suit or a submarine, something like that. So similarly, for a conscious self to function in the world of matter, which is an alien element, really, we need a vehicle that will allow us to function here, and that's what these bodies are. And our consciousness has been projected into these bodies from that higher level of reality, to which I believe we're meant to return. We're meant to return to that original level of pure consciousness. But while we're here in this world, we have to function through these machines, these vehicles that we call bodies. And where do they come from? I believe they're designed and built by higher intelligences in the cosmos. Ultimately, I believe there's a supreme intelligence that's responsible for it all. But there's a difference between, say, an ordinary machine built by an engineer and these bodies that are constructed by these higher beings. Because if an ordinary machine, it won't reproduce. For example, there are engineers, scientists who design automobiles, but you can't put two automobiles together in your garage and come back a few weeks later and find they've had a baby automobile that's grown up. They won't reproduce like that. Whereas these human bodies and animal bodies, plant bodies of all kinds, they're so intelligently designed that they can reproduce. And once the original ones are produced, they go on to reproduce. They each reproduce their own kind. Not as the evolutionists think that one can turn into another, but it's that when the original forms of plants and animals are produced, they can reproduce their own kind. You can vary them a little bit. For example, if you have dogs, you can breed big dogs or small dogs, dogs with long hair or short hair, but they remain dogs. Now if you could, so that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. These vehicles that we call bodies, where you were asking, well, if we didn't evolve from apes, where did we come from? I believe that the human form has always been here. The ape form has always been here. The ape-man form has always been here because the higher intelligence in the cosmos, they understand that different conscious selves require different kinds of vehicles because different conscious selves have different purposes. Just like an automobile manufacturing company, it doesn't make just one kind of car. It makes some SUVs, it makes some inexpensive two-door sedans and four-door sedans and trucks and heavier trucks and bigger trucks, because the automobile manufacturing company understands that different people have different incomes, different needs, and different taste in terms of the kind of vehicle they want to get. So, the automobile manufacturing company makes all the different kinds of vehicles so that every customer will be able to get the kind of vehicle he or she needs. So in a similar way, the higher intelligence in the cosmos understands the different desires that different kinds of conscious selves have, and provides, so the higher intelligence provides a whole range of vehicles for the conscious selves to occupy. That's how I see things. That's how I would explain, well, if we didn't evolve from apes, where did we come from? Well, we're conscious beings who originally existed on some higher level of reality. We've come somehow or other to this level of reality, the level of matter, and in order to function here, we need different kinds of vehicles. So the higher intelligence in the cosmos has provided the human vehicle. It's designed, constructed, built, the human vehicle in order for conscious selves with a certain type of consciousness to use that vehicle to function in this level of reality. But the vehicle, the human vehicle, also has the ability to allow the conscious self to return to the original level of pure consciousness. But there are a lot of forces and interests in society today that don't want to see that happen. They would rather keep people working like slaves in the world of matter because they benefit from that. They benefit from having lots of people working to produce and consume more and more material things. It generates a lot of wealth, and there's certain powers and interests in the world today that benefit from that, that control that, that exploit that, and that's why we see so many problems in the world. It's the way things are set up is very unfair. As
sure, I'll agreed.
Yeah, as people saw during this economic crisis, they could understand. Yeah, some people are taking advantage of the system for their own selfish, greedy purposes, not caring about what it's doing to other people who are part of the same society. That's the way it's set up, and and I think there are forces in society, in human society, that want to keep things that way.
Now, if the human race is indeed hundreds of millions of years older than most believe, does that prove we did not evolve in, say, the Darwin way?
Well, it certainly means we didn't evolve in any way that's like what we read in the textbooks today. But I think it means we need a whole new explanation of how things came about. See, it's not, as I point out in my book, Human Devolution, I'm not just talking about the fact that we've been here for a long time. It is the only thing that contradicts the current evolutionary theories. There's a lot of other evidence that contradicts those theories. For example, the supporters of the current theory of evolution would have to say that the first living thing on Earth self-organized from chemicals, because they think life is just chemicals. They believe there were some chemicals in the Earth's early ocean, and somehow or other they combined together those chemicals to form some first single-celled organism. But nobody can explain how that actually happened. So that's one flaw in the current theory of evolution. They just haven't been able to explain how you can get a living thing just from matter, combining.
Michael, not to be funny, but I tried to put chemicals together to form life once when I was a kid. It was called sea monkeys. I bought those, and it didn't work out too well.
Yeah, that's so it's something like that. So, and then another thing is these vehicles that we have are actually quite complex. And they say, well, yes, human beings they were monkeys that transformed into human beings. Not monkeys like you see in the zoo today, but some ancient kind of monkey that existed many millions of years ago. And they say they transformed into human beings. And it sounds nice, but we have to understand that human beings or any other living things are very complex bits of machinery. They're more, the molecular machinery in the human body is more complex than the most complicated machines human beings have ever built. Whether we're talking about computers or jet planes or satellites, just on the level of looking at the molecular machinery that's in a human being or any other living thing, we find that it's extremely complex. And if you have a complex bit of machinery, if you change part of it, that affects the whole machine. You can't just say if you've got an automobile and you decide to make the camshafts, like 1 inch longer, or you decide to make the cylinders, like say you've got an engine, like a V8 engine, and you decide, well, you're going to make the cylinders a half inch wider than they are. You can't just do that. You have to redesign the whole engine, if you're going to do something like that. You can't just say, yeah, I'm going to make, the cylinders a half inch wider, and that's it. If you just do that, then the whole thing is it's not going to work. You have to simultaneously change everything to fit the new concept. So it can't just happen as, the evolutionists say, by accident. The idea that you just go into an engine, a running engine, and change a part of it, just by accident, throwing a monkey wrench into the machinery and hope that you're going to get a better engine out of it. It's a ridiculous idea. So these sorts of there's a lot of evidence, and of course, if they want to say, human beings evolved from apes and monkeys, that means there can't have been human beings before that. So what I did in my book, Forbidden Archeology, is I showed there's evidence, that human beings have been present for millions and millions of years on Earth. It certainly contradicts the Darwinian theory of evolution as it's taught today. Now, if they want to go back to the drawing boards and try to come up with some new theory, well, let them. But at least they should admit their current theory is just totally wrong.
Right. Now, what kind of things are actually out there? Like, what kind of stuff have you found in your research that actually proves that human beings go back as far as millions of years ago?
Well, there's, in my book, Forbidden Archeology, I document hundreds of cases, but let me just talk about a few of them. One case that I've always found really fascinating is the California gold mine discoveries. Like back in the gold rush days, gold was discovered in California, so miners went there to get the gold. And to get the gold, they were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains, like there's Table Mountain, which is near the town of Sonora in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. And deep inside these tunnels, in the solid rock, the miners were finding human bones and human artifacts. They found obsidian, spear points, stone tools and weapons of all kinds, things like that. And these were found in layers of rock that modern geologists tell us are about 50 million years old.
Amazing.
And according to the current theories, that's before the time of the first apes and monkeys even. That's, according to the current theories, they think human beings like us only came into existence maybe 100,000 years ago, something like that. So to have human beings at 50 million years ago is really quite astonishing. So all these discoveries from the California gold mines, they were investigated by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. Mount Whitney is named after him, for example, one of the biggest mountains here in America. And his report about these discoveries was published by Harvard University, but we don't read about these discoveries in the textbooks today because of this process of knowledge filtration that goes on. There was another scientist who lived at the same time as Dr. Whitney. His name was William Holmes. He was an anthropologist working at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And he said, these are his words, he said, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, he wouldn't have published that report. In other words, if the facts did not support the theory of human evolution, they shouldn't have been published. They should simply have been forgotten, set aside. So that's really what happened. But some of the artifacts from the California gold mines are still in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. And a few years ago, I was a consultant for a television program called The Mysterious Origins of Man that was shown on NBC. And it was hosted by Charlton Heston. It was made a few years ago. But the producer, a man named Bill Cote, he had gotten a copy of my book, Forbidden Archeology, and he wanted to include some of the cases in the book in that documentary. So I gave him some of the cases, and one of them was this California gold mine case. So I told him he should go to this museum at the University of California. So he went there, but they refused to give him permission to see and film the artifacts. So somehow or other, we found some photographs of the artifacts that were taken by Dr. Whitney in the 19th century. So we did have some images to put in the show. But it was really interesting what happened when scientists who support the current Darwinian theory of evolution found out that NBC was going to show this television program to the American people. They tried to stop NBC from showing it. They started trying to organize boycotts of the advertisers of the show. They were very upset that kids were going to, see something on this television show that contradicted what they were being taught in school. So they tried to stop NBC from showing the program. They weren't successful. Actually, it was a pretty popular show, so NBC broadcast it a second time. And that made these scientists extremely angry. So then they went to the Federal Communications Commission, which is the agency that licenses and regulates the TV broadcasting industry. And they tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, to censure NBC. They wanted the FCC to force NBC to broadcast primetime apologies for having shown this program. And I'm happy to say the FCC didn't do that. They also wanted the FCC to fine NBC millions of dollars, so they'd never do anything like this again. So I'm happy to say that the FCC didn't do any of that, but I thought it was really interesting that these kinds of attempts were made. And maybe if this only happened, maybe if there was only one case like this, you could say, well, there may be a few questionable cases, but the vast majority of evidence supports the current theories. There's not just one or two of these cases. There are hundreds of them, and we could talk for hours and hours and hours about all of them. But there's some that I consider particularly interesting for two reasons. First, the first thing is the evidence itself that shows human beings have been around for a lot longer than the current theories allow, and then the evidence of the knowledge filtering process that goes on in connection with these discoveries. So I thought this California gold mine case was a pretty good example on both counts. You've got extensive evidence for human beings existing 50 million years ago, and plus you've got extensive evidence of knowledge filtering that's going on in connection with these discoveries. And another case, say from the more recent history of archaeology that I really like a lot, is some discoveries that an American geologist was involved in. The geologist's name is Virginia Steen McIntyre, and I know her personally. Like in the 1970s, when she's getting on a little bit in years now, but in the 1970s, when she was a young scientist, a young geologist, a rising star in her field, she was getting invitations to speak at major international conferences. She was getting all kinds of grant money to support her work. She was getting all kinds of publications. At that time, when she was a rising star in her field, she was called to date an archaeological site in Mexico. There's a place in Mexico called Huayatlaco. It's near the town of Puebla in central Mexico. And some American archaeologists were working there. They were digging there, and they found some human artifacts. And they wanted to know how old they were. So they called a team of geologists, including Virginia Steen McIntyre, to come down there and date the site, because that's what the geologists do. They can tell you how old the artifacts are, how old the layers of rock in which the artifacts were found are. So they came down, these archaeologists, Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues, and they used 4 of the latest scientific methods to date the site. And they got an age of 300,000 years. Now, that's not as old as the 50-million-year-old artifacts from the California gold mines, but still, it contradicts the current theories. So the archaeologists, they said, well, we can't accept that age for the site, 300,000 years, 250,000 years. We can't accept that because human beings capable of making the artifacts that were found there did not exist 300,000 years ago, according to their theories. They had not evolved yet from the ape men. So these archaeologists, they refused to publish the age for the site that was given by their own hand-picked team of geologists. So the Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues, they were very upset by that they'd come, they did all this work, they gave the scientific age for the site, and then it was rejected just because it contradicted the theories. So Virginia Steen McIntyre and her colleagues decided to independently publish the age for the site. And when they did that, they experienced an extreme negative backlash from their colleagues, especially Virginia Steen McIntyre suffered from this. Her colleagues in the scientific world started calling her a troublemaker, a maverick, a publicity seeker. They just really came down hard on her, and she lost the teaching position that she held at a university, and practically speaking, her scientific career was finished, because she had dared to publish something that contradicted the Darwinian theory of human evolution. So, that's another case, that I like a lot, because it really shows what can happen to the scientists that are involved in finding things that shouldn't be found, or giving ages for human artifacts or human bones that just shouldn't be given according to the current theories. They can actually suffer a little bit for that professionally.
Well, sure. I've heard of plenty of cases where scientists have been ridiculed and really shot down for bringing out the truth. When they want to keep something hidden, they'll stop at no cost to do that. If you don't mind, I want to take a call quick. I wasn't going to take any calls to the second hour, but we have a call, I believe, from Poland, and he's been waiting on the line for a little while. So we have DJ from Poland. You are on Late Night in the Midlands. DJ, you with us?
Good morning, good evening. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, sir.
That's great. It's good to meet you, Michael Vara. You're on NSearch. Me also, I'm on NSearch as DJ Prophet. How are you?
Okay, great. Doing great. Thank you, sir.
There's 2 Michaels on the air at the same time and a Billy.
Okay, so you have a question?
Maybe I can refer to you as MV and your guest, MC.
Okay,
MC,
that'll work.
Yeah. Well, anyway, interesting stuff that you're talking about there, Michael C. I'd like to maybe divert this conversation to something relevant that's today that people relate to what's happening today concerning the NWO, the New World Order, and I wrote a little article called "The Queen of the New World Order," and it was concerning a documentary that I saw on YouTube called "Ring of Power." I don't know, have any of you, Michael, have you seen this documentary, Ring of Power?
No, I haven't, but I'm one thing I like about being on shows like this is I often learn new things myself. In addition to being able to talk about what I know, I get to know, learn what other people are researching and looking into.
Okay, well, I researched this. I watched this video called Ring of Power, and some shocking facts and that really struck me, that central London, first of all, has a country status just like the Vatican, and Washington, D.C., the Washington District of Columbia, has a country status just like the Vatican. So this would indicate to me that the Queen is directly descended, well, she's the Ring of Power documentary suggested the Queen was directly descended from the Egyptian pharaohs. And the Egyptian pharaohs, of course, came from the Egyptian culture and the pyramids and everything like that. And also in the documentary, it suggested that Jesus Christ may have been the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, and was named Isis, the son of God. And whenever prayers are said in our modern culture, in the Christianity, the end of the prayer, people, Amen, right? And to say Amen is actually praising the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep. I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Michael.
Well, in the alternative history field, there's a lot of different researchers looking into different areas of it. The particular area that I've looked into is archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity. So I haven't really looked into that question, really. So, I mean, just to be honest, in some cases, I just have to say, I don't know. Sometimes I have to say that when I asked about something that I haven't really looked into and studied the pros and cons about. I can't really give a good answer to that. So that's about all I can say about it. Yeah, I to the extent that I have looked at things connected with Egypt, it's been in connection with evidence for extreme human antiquity. For example, one thing I found is that there was the Egyptian historian, back in ancient times, who gave a list of pharaohs that go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And what modern historians will say about this pharaoh list given by Manetho, was his name, the ancient Egyptian historian, is that the last ones in the list, the ones that go back a few thousand years maybe, are real historical personalities, but the ones that go back tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years, are simply mythological. But I don't really accept that view of things. I think there's evidence that human beings like us have existed for hundreds of thousands, millions of years on Earth. So to me, it's not surprising that the Egyptian pharaoh list go very, very far back in time. So that area of Egyptian history I've looked into a little bit, but I can't say that I've looked into every single area. I guess there's got to be some division of labor in the alternative history field. So some of us are looking at different questions. So.
Okay, well, thanks for the call, DJ. I appreciate it. And now I wanted to get back onto humans of millions of years ago and ask if, do we know what kind of tech these humans had at hand that long ago?
Well, there are two ways to learn about what went on in the very distant past, millions of years ago. One is to look at what's left there and the layers of the earth, the rocks, the record of the rocks, you might say. And what we might periods of time. A lot of the high-tech stuff probably wouldn't last very long, because the stuff that we consider to be high-tech involves metals and plastics and things like that. But over long periods of time, the metals will oxidize and plastics will dissolve. Whereas, if we had, say, 50 million years ago, we had some people, they were using stone tools and primitive technology like that made of stone, and other people were using high-tech stuff made of metal, then what's going to be left after 50 million years, for archaeologists today to find? They're going to find the stone tools and things like that because those last for long periods of time. But the high-tech stuff, it doesn't last very long. There's actually been some interesting documentaries that have aired on the Discovery Channel and History Channel in recent years. One of them, I think, was called World Without Us. And this is based on the concept that, well, what if human beings disappeared from the earth today? What would happen to our cities, to all our high-tech stuff? And so scientists have investigated this, and they tell us that within a few thousand years, most of it will be gone. And what to speak of after several million years, because, as I said, the metals will oxidize, and there's a lot of natural disasters that can happen. For example, most of our cities are built on the banks of rivers and on the shores of oceans, and they depend on systems of dams and seawalls and flood channels, flood control channels to exist. But if human beings stopped existing for a while and there was nobody to maintain the dams and the seawalls and the flood control systems, the rivers and the tidal waves and the tsunamis would wipe a lot of this stuff out. And plus, there'd be no fire department, so fires would burn uncontrolled through these cities. The metals would oxidize, everything. So what we find in the layers of the earth may not be the complete story. It may show us that human beings were existing millions and millions of years ago, but it may not tell us about everything that they had. But fortunately, there are other ways to learn about the past. Another way to learn about the past is the written records that have been left, by ancient civilizations. For example, if we look at the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which are collectively called the Vedas, we find in those ancient writings accounts of spaceships. They were called vimanas. That was the Sanskrit word for them. And they're very elaborate descriptions of these craft. They could travel from planet to planet. There are very elaborate descriptions of them. I was reading one Vedic text that described that they have Mercury engines, and there's some very interesting descriptions, very elaborate descriptions of what we would call UFOs, but they were called vimanas, spacecraft that could travel from planet to planet and even from dimension to dimension within the universe. And so those kinds of descriptions are there. There's also descriptions telling how people had atomic weapons resembling our modern nuclear weapons. They had an understanding of the atom and how to get energy, from it. And there's some descriptions of big battles that took place in very ancient times, and that involved use of these weapons, which were called brahmastras. And it's sort of interesting that the American physicist, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, who built the American atomic bomb during World War II, was also a student of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. So when he tested the first American atomic bomb at Alamogordo in New Mexico and saw the explosion, he began to quote passages from the ancient Sanskrit writings that describe how these weapons are like having millions of suns in the same place, shining at once, because that's what the light was like coming, from this. And these ancient writings also describe how they were able to calculate time by the movement of atoms. So if we look at some of the records left by some of these ancient civilizations, we could see that some of them had very high levels of technology. They had very deep understanding of the laws of nature, and they were actually able to make use of these understandings to come up with some very interesting things, like these vimanas, like these brahmastra weapons, and things of that sort. So there are two ways to learn about the past: what we can find in the record of the rocks, and then what we can find in the written records left by some of these ancient civilizations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what happened to these hundreds of millions of year old human beings? Did something wipe them out? And I mean, how many times in the past has this happened? Can we tell by the rocks even?
Yes, well, it's sort of interesting. I think there have been periodic catastrophes that have wiped out life on Earth, after which the Earth has had to have been repopulated. And it's interesting. According to many of the ancient civilizations, time goes in cycles. It's not just linear, going from point A to point B. It goes in cycles. Like in the course of the year, you get winter, spring, summer, fall. Then there's another winter, spring, summer, fall. It's a cycle that repeats and repeats and repeats. So according to a lot of the writings of the ancient civilizations, there are periodic catastrophes. Like a lot of people, they're talking about the year 2012 because the Mayan calendar, the ancient Mayan calendar of the Mayan civilization in Central America, it has this idea of vast cycles of time. So according to the way that some people read their ancient calendar, one of those big cycles is going to come to an end in December 2012, and then there'll be another cycle coming. But some people think, well, maybe there'll be a catastrophe. Maybe some people think it'll be a time of enlightenment. Some people say it'll be both. We'll just have to wait and see. But according to the ancient Sanskrit writings, there are vast cycles of time, and technically they're called manvantars. That's what the name of the cycle is, and the cycle lasts about 300 million years, and they're part of a larger cycle, which lasts about 4 billion years. So that within the 4 billion year cycle, which is called a kalpa, there are 14 of these manvantars, which last about 300 million years. And according to the ancient Sanskrit cosmological calendar, we're now about halfway through a kalpa, the larger cycle of time, which means we're about 2 billion years through this kalpa. And that means we're now in the 7th manvantar period, which means there have been 6 before us. And after each one, there's a devastation, according to these ancient writings, which wipes out life on Earth. And after that, life has to be repopulated on Earth from higher levels in the cosmos. So according to that, there have been 6 of these devastations that have taken place over the past 2 billion years. And it's sort of interesting that according to modern geology, modern paleontology, over the past 2 billion years, there have been 6 major extinction events in the history of life on Earth, the last one being the one that wiped out the dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some interesting parallels there between these ancient wisdom traditions and what modern science tells us. But to answer your question, yes, I think that as far as the history of human life on Earth is concerned, yes, human life has been here for millions and millions of years, actually up to about 2 billion years, I believe. Human life has been here during the current creation cycle. But within those 2 billion years, there have been 6 devastations, after which the Earth had to be repopulated. And where is it repopulated from? I would say from higher levels in the cosmos. It's not that, if life is wiped out on Earth, that life in the whole universe is wiped out. There's life in other parts of the universe, in different solar systems, in different galaxies, even on different levels or dimensions of the cosmos. So from those higher levels, there are intelligent beings who repopulate, the Earth, so that the cycle continues to go on. Sure.
We're talking life on other planets. I mean, cloning, even reseeding the Earth, is kind of like a Noah starship. Yeah,
something like that. And of course, I guess, that's what originally happened. Even if you want to look at the Bible or any of the other ancient wisdom traditions, they say that in the beginning, life was created on Earth in some fashion or other. That means, there's something that existed beyond the Earth that was capable of implanting life on Earth, and that's actually what I believe as well. That there is some higher intelligence in the cosmos that's responsible for making life on Earth. But as I said, we talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. I believe as conscious beings, we have some existence on some higher level, but there's some kind of fall or by which we come down to this level where we need these vehicles in which to function. And the higher intelligence in the cosmos provides us with those vehicles, which we call bodies, in which to function on this level of reality. That's what I think happened. So yes, there is that kind of idea, and that's part of my thinking that yes, there's life elsewhere, and you could say in that sense we're all extraterrestrials, in the sense that we've come here from some other place ultimately. As conscious beings, we've come from some higher level of reality. That's what I would say. So in that sense, we'd all be, extraterrestrials. And this idea that there's extraterrestrial life is something that's becoming. It's not something that mainstream science likes to talk about a lot. But some of them are speaking about it a little bit. Like there's this famous astrophysicist named Stephen Hawking, the fellow who's in the wheelchair, but who's
yes, sir.
He recently made some statements about extraterrestrial life that he believes in it, and of course he was a little afraid. Maybe they're smarter than us and they're not very friendly. So he was. He was thinking, he was giving kind of a dark vision of it, but still he was talking about extraterrestrial life, and I found that archaeologists are also starting to talk about extraterrestrial archaeology. Like I'm a member of the World Archaeological Congress, which is one of the world's largest international organizations of archaeologists. And they have a big meeting every 4 years. So at the last meeting, which was held in Dublin, Ireland, you have maybe thousands of archaeologists coming from all over the world. there was a whole section of the conference that dealt with the topic of extraterrestrial archaeology. And in the previous big meeting they had, which was a few years before that in Washington, D.C. in 2003, they also had a section of the conference that was dealing specifically with extraterrestrial archaeology. And there they were concerned about two things. One thing is, of course, when archaeologists go out to the moon and to Mars and other places like that, what are they going to do with the stuff that we sent up there? You know,
right.
Like the United States and Russia have sent a lot of stuff to Mars and the moon and things like. So when in the future, when archaeologists from Earth go out there, what will they do with the stuff that they find that we sent out there? Who's it going to belong to? What museum will it go in? They're starting to think about these things. But they're also starting to wonder about, well, what if we find stuff that we didn't send out there? What if we find stuff from extraterrestrial civilizations out there on these planets or even in orbit? You know, just like we have satellites up there, maybe some extraterrestrial civilizations have sent satellites to observe us. You know, it's
right.
They're starting to think about these things, and you know, as archaeologists, you know, what are we going to do with this stuff? You know, who will it belong to? What museum will it go in? How will we explain it to people? It's they're starting to think about these things. So it's of course there's this whole issue of what's called disclosure. You know, many people in the UFO and alien abduction research areas, they think these things are already known, you know, by the governments, but they're just gradually disclosing it. So it may be something like that
Sure.
These things are becoming disclosed gradually.
And, you know, I think a lot of people are much more open to the idea of it, and I know I have been since a child. And it kind of leads me on to my next question is, could these ancient humans have mistaken these sightings from the ETs or the ETs as gods?
Well, see, I'll give you my personal point of view on that.
Okay.
That's one theory that some people have. Well, in ancient times, there were some people on Earth and some extraterrestrial human-like beings from other planets came with their technology, and the people on Earth, seeing them, were so overwhelmed by seeing these people with their advanced technology, spaceships, that they called them gods, and that's where our idea of gods comes from. See, to me, I don't think that the idea of God or gods and ancient astronauts are contradictory. I think you can have both things. You can have God, you can have higher beings, angels, you can have all that, and also you can have space-traveling extraterrestrials sort of like us. I don't think the two things are contradictory. I think there's evidence for both things as far as I'm concerned. Now, that'll probably get me in trouble with everybody. You know, the people who just believe in God or the people who just believe in extraterrestrials. I believe in both of them.
Yeah, I do too. I think there's room for both. You know, it's just there's so much evidence that really points to both ways, and
that's what I think.
Yeah, me too. Now, with this evolution, is science beginning to agree with this or not so much?
Well, science is not a monolith. But I'd say the majority of scientists who now are in positions of being able to control scientific institutions and the education systems are very much in support of the Darwinian theory of evolution, but there is a minority of scientists who are proposing different kinds of alternatives, like intelligent design, various kinds of creationism, and things like that. So here's how I look at it. I respect person's right. I believe in intellectual freedom. I believe in academic freedom. I believe that if somebody thinks the Darwinian theory of evolution is what makes most sense to them, I fully accept their right to believe in that theory, to promote it. But what I don't think they have a right to do is to use the government to exclude other ideas from the education system, to impose their ideas on everybody. That's where I kind of draw the line. I would say yes, most scientists today accept the Darwinian theory of evolution. That's a fact. But there's a minority who don't accept it. That's also a fact. I think that has to be respected. And I think it has to be respected in the education system, and I think it has to be respected in the scientific institutions. That just because you're in the majority doesn't mean, you have the right to suppress minority opinions and to impose your majority opinions on everybody.
Right.
That really doesn't work, whether it's in politics or economics. Like a certain company may have a monopoly in a certain sector of the economy, and of course it wants to stamp out all the competition, but it doesn't have the right to have the government help it do that. It should have to survive in fair competition. And the same with political, from time to time one political party gets a big majority. Doesn't mean they can crush the minority, completely ignore them. If they try to do that, it's going to backfire on them in one way or another. So similarly, within the scientific world, just because at a certain point in time, a group of scientists with a certain theory are in the majority, it doesn't mean they've got a right to use the government to exclude the minority opinions from the textbooks, from the education system, from the scientific institutions. It doesn't mean that at all, but that's unfortunately the way things are today. A lot of scientists who support the Darwinian theory of evolution, they like to talk about Galileo.
Mm-hmm.
They like to talk about how, several centuries ago there was this scientist named Galileo, and he had some different ideas about the solar system. And the church at that time didn't like his ideas, and the church had influence with the government. So the church used its influence with the government to suppress the ideas of Galileo. That was, and so they talk about how bad that was, and how Galileo was a good example of intellectual freedom and this, that, and the other. But now, today, when these same scientists, it's the scientists who have the influence with government today, and they're using their influence with government to suppress the ideas of scientists who have different theories apart from the Darwinian theory of evolution. For example, there's the intelligent design theorists. There are various kinds of creationists who are looking at the scientific theories in a different way. But because this majority of scientists has been able to influence the governments in the state level and the federal level, these, especially the judicial system, they've especially been able to influence the judicial system, the judicial branch of the government, so that when any group of people in the United States, in a county or a city or a state, try to pass a law asking for some diversity in the education system so that different alternatives to the Darwinian theory of evolution can be presented, then the supporters of the theory, they go to the federal courts, they convince them to declare these alternatives illegal. And I think that's really wrong. I support the right of any scientist or any individual to believe whatever they want to believe about the origin of life and how they look at the evidence and the inferences they make from the evidence. I think that's up to each individual to make their own decision about this, and I would say what they don't have a right to do is to impose their view on everybody else.
Right.
That, which is the unfortunate situation today, because most of the people in the United States, there have been surveys, Gallup surveys, that show that most of the people in the United States do not accept the Darwinian theory of evolution. They don't believe human beings evolved from apes. They have different ideas. And there are scientists who also support these ideas. Like I said, I regularly go to scientific conferences. I present papers against the Darwinian theory of evolution. There are many other scientists and scholars and academics who oppose the Darwinian theory of evolution. They're, as I said, they're the intelligent design theorists. They're different creation scientists of different kinds. And here's what I think should be done, just on a practical level, is, okay, let's admit, say 95% of the scientists today working in the life sciences accept this Darwinian theory of evolution. Okay, let them have 95% of the textbook pages, 95% of the classroom time for presenting their theories. But I think in 5% of the textbook pages in biology and 5% of the classroom time, the alternatives like intelligent design and creationism should be presented in a neutral and objective way, saying, yes, 95% of scientists today, they accept the Darwinian theory of evolution, but there are some scientists and researchers who oppose it, and here's what their positions are, and here's what they say. Make up your own mind about it. I think that would be the fairest thing to do. If you want to have a free democratic society, if you want to have a dictatorship, fine.
Yeah, and sometimes it seems like we're heading that way. Michael, what are the Vedas, I'm sorry.
The Vedas?
Vedas, yes.
Well, Veda is a Sanskrit word. It means knowledge. So collectively it means the ancient Sanskrit writings of India that deal with various categories of knowledge. Some of the categories of knowledge are spiritual. Some of them have to do with the origin of the universe, the origin of life, things like that. But basically, they are very similar to the writings of other ancient wisdom traditions, whether we're calling, we're looking at the Bible or the Quran or the Buddhist writings or others. As far as what they say about the origin of life in the universe, they all pretty much say the same thing. None of them say that human beings evolved from apes. None of them. They all say in some way or another that some higher intelligence, you can call God, for example, some supreme conscious being has something to do with the origin of life on Earth. It says, if you look at some of the texts, they say God created man in his image. All right. So that means, and it says directly, he didn't say, God first created the monkey and then turned him into a human being. None of these writings say that. That's something that came out later, in the minds of, people a couple centuries ago. So practically all the different writings of all these different ancient wisdom traditions, pretty much they all say the same thing. They all talk about, a cosmos that's inhabited by beings at different levels. They may have different names for them. Like in Christianity, they say, there are humans existing on earth, there's angels, and then there's God in heaven. In other words, it's a multi-level cosmos where you have different sorts of beings existing at different levels of the cosmos. And the same thing is there in the Vedas. They may use a different terminology, but the same thing is there. Yes, there are human beings on Earth, there are higher beings in the middle, and at the top, there's some supreme conscious being. And this is something, that you can find in practically all the wisdom traditions of the world. They have the same basic picture of reality. And I mean, there are a lot of differences, of course. And, if you get down to the the details of theology and salvation and everything, they may all have different. But if we're talking more on the level of what they say about the nature of reality, the nature of life, the nature of the universe, they all talk about a multi-level universe with different types of beings inhabiting the different levels. None of them say that human beings came from the apes. They all say that human beings have been around since the beginning. It's you find a lot of common features in what these different ancient wisdom traditions say. So I tend to focus on the commonalities, and there are different ways that people try to explain these commonalities. And some people say, well, it's because the human mind just comes up with the same kinds of fantasies, in different parts of the world. But I think that's not the real explanation. Why, from all different parts of the world, from all different sources of traditional spiritual wisdom, you have the same basic picture of reality emerging, is because I think they're all looking at the same reality, from their different perspectives. For example, if you have a mountain, somebody may describe it from the east, from the west, from the south, from the north, and the descriptions are going to be a little bit different, but it's also going to be obvious that they're talking about the same thing. They're just looking at it from slightly different perspectives. So in the descriptions that we get of the universe and life in it from these different ancient wisdom traditions, I think I see a lot of commonalities because they're all looking at the same thing from their different perspectives. So that's how I tend to look at it, and I don't claim to have any exclusive truth. I don't say that I'm just right and everybody else is wrong. I think truth can be found in a lot of different places, and I'm prepared to recognize the truth wherever I see it. I don't really believe in exclusive claims to truth. That's just my way of looking at it. So Veda simply means knowledge, and to me, knowledge can be found not just in the ancient Sanskrit writings, but it can be found in science, it can be found in religion, it can be found in art, music, philosophy, sports even. You can find truth in a lot of different places.
Now, I had Frank Joseph Hoff on this show not too long ago, and we talked about Atlantis. And he spoke of, some archaeology findings and so on, and mentioned that they talked about flying craft and nuclear war, maybe as long as 12,000 years ago now. How much is known about that?
Well, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier in the show, the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which in written form they go back about 5,000 years, but they're part of an oral tradition that goes much further back in time. It goes back many, many millions of years, and they give histories of things that have happened on Earth, and not just on the Earth, but elsewhere in the cosmos. They tell of histories going back many, many millions of years. And these ancient Sanskrit writings do, as I mentioned earlier in the show, talk about spacecraft. They were called vimanas. They give very elaborate descriptions of them, how they move, how they fly. They describe battles involving these things, and they also describe weapons resembling our modern nuclear weapons. They were called brahmastras. That was the name for them. So, yes, these ancient civilizations apparently had very high levels of technology, at least in some parts of of the world and at some times in the vast cycles of time that have gone on.
Okay, now Edgar Casey talked about information on some Hall of Records at the base of the Sphinx. Is it possible this ancient records to exist?
Well, it's possible, and there are researchers who are kind of focused. I'm not really so much focused on Egypt myself, but there are groups of researchers who have done ground-penetrating radar studies that show that on the Giza Plateau, underneath the pyramids and the Sphinx in particular, there are some hollow chambers down there. The ground-penetrating radar appears to show that, and some have even claimed to have visited some of these underground areas, but I think it's possible there could be a Hall of Records there, but whether or not it's there, I think the knowledge is always being preserved somehow or other. If it's not being preserved on Earth, it's being preserved on higher levels of reality. So yeah, I think that there is wisdom to be found in these ancient teachings. Some of it's already coming down to us, and there may be a lot more that's hidden away.
Now, do you have any knowledge of that cave that was found in the Grand Canyon, I believe, that's said to have Egyptian artifacts in it? Something that I read about.
Yes, there was a report in a newspaper that was published in Arizona in the early part of the 20th century that told of some researchers from the Smithsonian Institution that had gone into the Grand Canyon and had discovered a huge cavern that contained within it a lot of apparently Egyptian artifacts. And I was very interested in that, and several other researchers have been interested, but nobody's been able to really track down. See, the newspaper article mentioned the names of several researchers who were supposedly associated with the Smithsonian Institution. And there have been attempts to get in touch with the Smithsonian Institution, and I see if they have any record of these researchers. And so far, those efforts haven't really revealed anything. So, or about the research that went on. So there is that original newspaper report, but beyond that, as far as I know, nobody's been able to track down and confirm any of the information that's in that report. So that's as much as I know about that. But I do think that in ancient times there was a lot of contact between North America and the other centers of world civilization. I don't think that Columbus was the first one from Europe to come to the Americas. I think there was always some contacts between the civilizations here and civilizations in other parts of the world.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, can you tell me a little bit about cosmic hierarchy?
Well, this is the idea that we're not alone in the cosmos. I believe that the universe is a multi-level universe, and that it's all the different levels of it are inhabited. Like we exist on one level of the universe that is dominated by ordinary matter. That's the level where we find ourselves now. And beyond that, there are more subtle levels where the energies are less dense than they are here. In those regions of the cosmos, they're also inhabited, and they're inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there who may have more subtle kinds of bodies than the the kinds of bodies that we have on this level of reality. And people have different names for these beings. They call them different things. They may call them angels, they may call them gods or goddesses or astral beings or extraterrestrials, or, people have a lot of different names, gene, things like that. Different cultures have different names for these subtle beings that inhabit, these intermediate regions of the cosmos. And then I believe beyond that, there's the level of pure consciousness, which is where we're originally from. So we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. It's interesting. Dr. John Mack, who was head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University, kind of became interested in this whole topic because he was hearing about people reporting abduction experiences, and he started looking into that. And as far as these UFO and alien abduction types of experiences are concerned, there's basically two kinds of interpretations. One is what I would call the nuts and bolts interpretation, where there's people who believe, well, just like we have our technology here on this planet, on other planets, there are beings pretty much like us who make use of the same resources, metals and things like that, to construct their own technologies, and then they come here and they do strange things like fly through our airspace and maybe abduct some of our people for their medical experiments or something like that, and they just interpret everything in terms of the nuts and bolts aspect of it. But there's another group of researchers, of which this Dr. Mack was a part, that tend to see a more paranormal element to it, because a lot of these people that have these abduction experiences report being, like they're in their house and then they're floated through the wall and taken up into one of these motherships where they communicate telepathically with alien beings and things like that. So there's a more you could say paranormal aspect to the whole phenomenon, which tends to line up with a lot of the accounts from the ancient wisdom traditions of angels and astral beings and different higher beings existing in more subtle realms of the cosmos, with powers that we would interpret as being mystic powers even. So in his book, Passport to the Cosmos, this Dr. John Mack, who was head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University, after all his study of these reports from these people reporting these abduction experiences, he wrote, it appears ever more likely that we exist in a multi-level cosmos which is filled with gods, spirits, intelligences, beings at all different levels. So that's pretty much the picture of reality that I have, that we exist in a multi-level cosmos with different sorts of beings inhabiting all these different levels. And I mean, some people may ask, well, where's kind of the evidence for that? That it's one thing to say, well, in ancient wisdom traditions they talk about a multi-level cosmos, but what sort of evidence is there today that we can observe that would lead us to believe that we exist in such a multi-level cosmos as part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings? And I think some of the evidence that comes to us from the modern UFO alien abduction type of phenomenon leads in that direction. And there are other types of evidence that also suggest that there are other levels of the cosmos that are inhabited by conscious beings. And I think there are a few categories of evidence that suggest that. One is that sometimes people in this world report receiving communications from the spirits of departed humans. That's one category of such evidence. There was a famous British physicist who lived during the early 20th century. His name was Oliver Lodge, very famous physicist. His son was killed in World War I. His son was named Raymond. So after his son died, he was able to establish communication with the spirit of his departed son through a medium. And during these communications, whoever was communicating was revealing knowledge that would have only been known to his son. There was all kinds of detailed information about confidential aspects of the family history that would have only been known by Raymond. So sometimes you have scientists reporting things like that, receiving communications from the spirits of departed humans. And sometimes there are also apparitions of the spirits of departed humans and things of that sort. Or there are cases of spirit possession that appear to involve the spirits of some higher beings, of either a demoniac or an angelic character possessing the bodies of humans living on this level of existence. So there are a lot of different categories of evidence that suggest that we're existing as part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. We live in a multi-level cosmos.
Yeah, I believe that there's all types of possibilities. Some have mentioned that abductions are actually satanic and demons or what have you. And I suppose that it's all a possibility. If you're going to believe in one, then you probably should believe in it all, because just because you don't see it don't mean it's not there. And there's just so much proof, going even back to cave drawings and so on. I mean, with UFOs and so on. And you look up into the stars, and you just I can't believe for 1 minute that we're alone. And I've always thought that there was a much higher power, whatever that is. It's there.
Yeah, and that's part of the traditional wisdom of humankind. If you look at all different peoples, Native American peoples, African tribal peoples, Australian Aboriginals, Pacific Islanders, the great civilizations of Greece, Rome, Egypt, the great spiritual traditions of humanity, they all tend to say we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And this is something that's just been totally eliminated from the worldview of modern science, which I think is unfortunate. It gives us a very incomplete and I think incorrect picture of our true place in the universe. And in order for us to function correctly, and say if a person is going to function correctly in society, they have to be aware of what their surroundings really are. And if they have an incorrect picture of what their real position is, they're going to wind up doing things that are going to be harmful to themselves and harmful to others. So I sort of think our human civilization is pretty much in that condition today because we don't have a proper understanding of our real place in the universe. We do things that cause harm to ourselves and others. So I think it is important to have a good picture of what our real place in the cosmos is.
Okay, great. Michael, to me, I mean, some still debate that we've come from apes, and somebody made a good point in the chat room, and I've thought this myself. If that's the case, then why are apes still here? So I think everything that you've said tonight makes incredible sense. And, I'm very happy that I had you on the show tonight because, I've learned quite a bit. And I do appreciate you being a guest on Late Night in the Midlands tonight. And if you would, Michael, can you tell everybody once more where to get your books and tell everyone what's next for Michael Cremo?
Okay. My books are pretty widely available, but if people would like to come to my personal website, mcremo.com, that would be very nice, mcremo.com. There they can see a little virtual museum of forbidden archaeology. They can learn about my travel schedule, upcoming lectures, upcoming media events. There's also an opportunity to purchase my books like Forbidden Archeology and Hidden History of the Human Race and Human Devolution on that website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com. And later this year, there'll be a new book available. It's called The Forbidden Archeologist, and it's made up of columns that I've written for Atlantis Rising magazine. The name of the column is The Forbidden Archeologist, and of course the readers of the magazine will know that, but if there are listeners out there who aren't readers of the magazine and they'd like to get a good summary of my work, these columns really do a good job of that, giving kind of bite-sized, easily digestible insights into the different topics that I'm concerned about, like archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, the cosmic hierarchy of beings, mind over matter, paranormal powers, things, all things like that can be found in these columns. So that'll be coming out in November, that book called The Forbidden Archeologist. So people can look out for that. So I think that's a good start, spoken about by scientists on television and stuff like that. If you go to the museum, you'll see these things because they go along with the current theories. But the more radical evidence, the evidence that contradicts the current theories is filtered out, which means it doesn't get included in the textbooks. You don't hear scientists talking about it on the National Geographic specials and things like that. If you go to the museum, you're not going to see these things on display. They may be there somewhere in the museum's collection, but you're not going to see them displayed to the public. So why does that happen? Why does this knowledge filtering happen? I think there are a few reasons for it. One is it's just human nature. For example, if I love somebody and somebody tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to believe it. I may even become angry at the person who tells me. That's just human nature. So today scientists are very much in love with their current theories. They're especially in love with the Darwinian theory of evolution, especially as it applies to human beings. And if they hear something that goes against the theory that they love, they don't want to accept it. They may even become angry at the person who says such things. That sort of thing does happen. But I think there's some deeper reasons for the knowledge filtering. It has to do with power. There are a lot of different kinds of power in the world. There's military power, there's political power, there's economic power. There's also intellectual power, which is a more subtle power, but it's a very real one. And we see that people who have power, particularly those who have monopoly power, normally they don't like to give it up. They like to keep their position of power. And today, the supporters of the current Darwinian theory of human evolution have a government-enforced monopoly in the education system in this country. By law, only their ideas can be taught. If anybody tries to teach anything different, they'll find themselves in big trouble for it. So somehow or other, they have this government-enforced monopoly in the education system, and that's a pretty good position to be in if you can think about it. If you have some idea and the government saying only your idea can be taught, that puts you in a very good position with respect to any alternative ideas. It means you're able to exclude any alternative ideas from the official education system, which means you're able to maintain your own power and influence and control over a lot of people's minds, and that's very important. So those are some of the reasons why I think they resist. And I think one reason they resist is that the alternatives to the Darwinian theory of human evolution are going to tend to involve things that the people who are now in control of the education system don't want people to hear about in any kind of authoritative way. They don't want people to hear that, well, maybe there's a spiritual element to reality, there's a more conscious-oriented element to reality, that we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings, that there might be something to what they call paranormal science. There might be something to UFOs and aliens that show that we're not alone in the universe. These are things that are very disturbing to the people who now have a government-enforced monopoly in the education system, and they want to keep that stuff out. They want to keep it marginalized. Sure. They want to have it. It may be there in society, but they want to keep it at the margins. So those are some of the reasons why I think this knowledge filtering process goes on. A lot of it has to do with power, money, things like that.
Okay, so now if we didn't evolve from apes, and I never really believed that myself, then how did we become?
Well, I think before we even ask that question, where did human beings come from, we should first of all ask the question, well, what exactly is a human being, or any other living thing for that matter? Now, today, most of the scientists who are working in the scientific institutions and teaching in the universities and writing the textbooks for the high school students believe that a human being or any other living thing is simply a combination of the ordinary material elements like iron and calcium and phosphorus. That's what they think we are. We're just a complex organization of these ordinary chemical elements. And, they think that if you organize these elements in a sufficiently complex way in the brain, then we get what we call mind and consciousness, but only in connection with the brain, with the body. And they believe as soon as you disorganize, these chemicals, there's no mind, no consciousness, no love, there's just nothing. Under this picture of reality, it is matter that is fundamental. It is only matter that really exists. And it's they believe that consciousness is just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. That's the mainstream scientific theory these days. So what I'm proposing is that there's something more to the human being than just the chemical elements. There's a real Well, the first book that I became famous for was Forbidden Archeology, which I had a co-author for that one. His name was Richard Thompson. And that book presents archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, archaeological evidence showing that human beings like us have been on this planet for tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years, and this evidence contradicts the current theories of human evolution that are taught by mainstream scientists. And then more recently, I've come out with another book called Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, in which I present a consciousness-based alternative to the current theories of human origins. I propose that we didn't evolve up from matter, but rather down from consciousness. That's what I mean by devolution. We didn't come up from matter, but down from pure consciousness or spirit. We're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And these books are pretty widely available on the internet, bookstores, things like that. But if people like, they can visit my personal website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, and they can learn more about the books there, get them if they like.
Okay, great. Now, me, myself, I believe man has been around a lot longer than we are told. So, Michael, why has modern science, how come they're not, don't believe man is as old as maybe you believe?
Well, I think there's several reasons for that. First of all, I should say that there's a lot of scientific evidence that's been reported by scientists that shows that human beings like us have always been present on Earth. That's a fact. That's there in the original scientific reports, but these reports don't make it into the textbooks that are used in the official education system, in the high schools and the universities. It's kept out because of what I call a process of knowledge filtration, that operates in the world of science, where the discoveries that go along with the currently dominant theory that human beings like us only came into existence about 100,000 or 200,000 years ago, and before that there were only primitive ape-like ancestors. Evidence that goes along with that evolutionary theory of human origins passes through the knowledge filter, and therefore it'll be there in the textbooks at high school and university. It'll be really existing mind element with some very unusual paranormal powers like remote viewing, psychokinesis, that means mind over matter, the ability of the mind to make matter move in ways that violate our current laws of physics. And beyond this subtle mind element with its very unusual powers like telepathy and remote viewing and psychokinesis is a conscious self that can exist completely apart from the body, completely apart from the brain, completely apart from matter. So when I speak of mind and consciousness, I don't mean, as many scientists today mean, just a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. I mean real things with their own independent existence. So that means a human being is made of matter, mind, and consciousness. And I believe it's consciousness that is the most essential part of the human being, and that consciousness, that individual conscious self, originally exists on some higher level of reality, what I would call a level of pure consciousness. But if it comes down into this level of reality, it needs a vehicle in which to function. For example, as human beings, we're normally meant to live on the land. We walk around on the land. If we want to live underwater, we need some vehicle that will allow us to function in the element of water. We need a submarine or a diving suit. So where do those submarines and diving suits come from? Well, they come from intelligent engineers who understand that if a human being is going to exist under the water, it's going to need a special vehicle. So these engineers, they design and build such things. So in the same way as beings of pure consciousness, we're normally meant to exist on a level of pure consciousness. If we come down into the world of matter, which is where we find ourselves now, then as conscious beings, we need vehicles made of matter that will allow us to function on this level of reality. And those vehicles are what we call bodies, human bodies, plant bodies, animal bodies. And where do they come from? Well, they come from higher intelligences in the cosmos who understand that if conscious selves are going to function in the world of matter, they need vehicles made of matter in which to function there. So these higher intelligences, they design and build such vehicles that we call bodies, including the human body. It's very similar to an idea that's become very popular recently in these Avatar films. And in that Avatar film, they've got this guy, his consciousness is projected from his normal body into the body of an alien being on an alien planet, so that he functions on that alien planet by having his consciousness channeled through this alien body on that alien planet. So pretty much, according to what I think, we're all pretty much in that situation. We're all avatars in that sense, and that we're ultimately from some other place where we exist on a level of pure consciousness. And
so our bodies are a vehicle for our consciousness, as a boat would be for our bodies to, say, travel through water.
Yeah, like a submarine. Like if you want to live under the water, you can't just you can swim underwater for a few minutes or seconds, but if you really want to stay there, you need a vehicle like a diving suit or a submarine, something like that. So similarly, for a conscious self to function in the world of matter, which is an alien element really, we need a vehicle that will allow us to function here, and that's what these bodies are. And our consciousness has been projected into these bodies from that higher level of reality to which I believe we're meant to return. We're meant to return to that original level of pure consciousness. But while we're here in this world, we have to function through these machines, these vehicles that we call bodies. And where do they come from? I believe they're designed and built by higher intelligences in the cosmos. Ultimately, I believe there's a supreme intelligence that's responsible for it all. But there's a difference between, say, an ordinary machine built by an engineer and these bodies that are constructed by these higher beings. Because if an ordinary machine, it won't reproduce. For example, there are engineers, scientists who design automobiles, but you can't put two automobiles together in your garage and come back a few weeks later and find they've had a baby automobile that's grown up. They won't reproduce like that. Whereas these human bodies and animal bodies, plant bodies of all kinds, they're so intelligently designed that they can reproduce. And once the original ones are produced, they go on to reproduce. They each reproduce their